Linda.
We are recording.
There it comes.
Linda, I like your beach scene. I wish I was wherever that is.
Me too.
Is that Galapagos?
Very nice.
Oh, I wish.
Okay, Mr. Drummond,
Yes, sir. It would appear that we are live and we are recording, so I will begin the meeting at 4:31 p.m. Welcome to the June 23rd, 2021 BAR Large Virtual Meeting. My name is John Robinson. The other board members present this afternoon are Jay White, Luda Subchuk, James Metters, and Eddie Fable. City staff present are Tori Parrish, Lawrence Courtney, and Linda Bennett. The order of the meeting will be as follows. We will have an introduction and overview of the presented project by city staff to the board and for the public. This will be followed by an application presentation, which may last for up to 10 minutes with a time limit extension as determined by the chair, and any questions of the applicant by the board or staff. Any and all presenters should clearly state their name for the record. Persons affiliated with the project, be they owners, developers, designers, consultants, or others, should speak during this portion rather than in the following public comment period. There shall then be a public comment period lasting for a 10-minute time limit or to be extended as determined by the chair. The applicant does not respond to comments made during the public comment period. We mute Mr. Crouch.
Sorry.
The applicant does not respond to comments made during the public comment period. Again, any members of the public should clearly state their name for the record. The public comment period is followed by city staff comments and recommendations. The applicant is then permitted a response or clarification period to either the public comment or city and staff recommendations, as the case may be. There's a 5-minute limit. The applicant then takes a seat and is only only speaks if called upon by the board or staff. This is followed by board discussion and a potential vote. The applicant presentation and public comment is closed at this point. The applicant may clarify inaccurate information when recognized by the chair by raising a hand and waiting to be called upon, but otherwise may only speak if asked a question by a board member. This evening, it is my understanding that no item has been withdrawn or deferred. We have one policy matter to discuss after presentations this evening. This is a reminder to the public and our presenters tonight to please turn off all cell phones and other devices. Please limit your comments to architecture only. Comments related to zoning or comments regarding parking, traffic, lot coverage, and livability concerns are not within the purview of this board and therefore cannot be voiced here. I will read some additional protocol related to our online meetings. Staff will control the PowerPoint presentation that includes everything submitted by the applicant by the deadline in accordance with submittal requirements. Applicants simply need to ask the staff to advance to the next slide during the presentation or to any slide that they care to reference. Applicants, staff, and board members are required to give their name whenever speaking. Video and microphone has been disabled for all attendees. Attendees, as opposed to board members or staff, will only be given the capabilities to speak when they are called on during the public comment period. Chat and Q&A functions have been disabled. Regarding public comment, the applicants, be they all team members and the public, have been required to register, indicate the project that they wish to comment on, and submit any documents in advance of the meeting. Just as in an in-person meeting, all applications heard today are part of a public meeting format. If you have registered and will speak during the public comment portion of the meeting, you will need to state your name and address for the record. Those members of the public that have registered will be called upon in order of registration by project. Staff will call on the registered members of the public to speak with each project. Unregistered members of the public who raise their hand will not be called on. Additionally, regarding the board members will be polled by the chairperson for comments and for their votes on any motion. Each member, when voting, should respond yay in favor or nay not in favor. The chair shall reread the motion verbatim, and the board member making the motion should correct the chair if he has not reread the motion accurately. If a board member needs to recuse, he or she will temporarily be removed from the meeting and placed back in the meeting at the start of the next agenda item. If for any reason the board needs to go into executive session, they will call into a separate conference line, and all video and audio on Zoom will temporarily be turned off until they are ready to return to the regular meeting. Results and staff comments will be posted on the city website at www.charleston-sc.gov/BAR. These proceedings are being recorded and broadcast via the City of Charleston's YouTube channel. Mrs. Parrish, what is agenda item 1 for this evening?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Agenda item number 1 is 99 South Market Street. This is the request for after the fact final approval for demolition of exterior awnings, canopies, ramps, stairs, water feature railings, and the courtyard paving materials that were there. The courtyard is not rated, constructed in 1978, and this is in the old and historic district. We've got an arrow right here. You can see with the red box outlined the location of the courtyard with the market across the street. And then this is some context photos. This is the site. This picture is from before the demolition that occurred. What you're seeing is the materials that were demolished. Another street photo here looking at the courtyard prior to demolition. And then we have one here looking west on Market Street. And the next one will be looking east on Market Street with the site to your right. And then we also have a series of photos that were taken by Lawrence on a site visit. And we're going to kind of pan through these. This is standing closer to the sidewalk and looking into the site. You're going to see sort of a mix of demolition and construction, maybe. There are 3 trees at the center of the courtyard that you can see a couple of those here. Also, there's a structure at the back to the left that you'll need to pay attention to at some point. That's going to be reincorporated as well into the new design. Okay, and with that, we'll have Mr. Crouch present. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, can you hear me?
We can, Mr. Crouch, you have the floor.
All right, well, I don't really have much to say except that the stuff that was removed was not in any case of any historic value. In fact, it was pretty rotten and deteriorated. Mr. Berry, the contractor, was working on the interior of the unit, the old ice house, the Bubba Gump, and then the mill before that, and several other things. In fact, it was the mill that built the water feature and the ramp. And the original plans called for it to be colored concrete, but it got built out of pressure treated, and Trex pressure treated had deteriorated to a point where it was unsafe to walk on the Trex. In fact, some of the boards had come up. I'm treating this as if I'm asking you for permission to demolish it before the fact instead of after the fact. Our intent here is to rebuild the courtyard in a certainly safer and more aesthetically pleasing manner. And also the little building that was used variously as an outside oyster bar and then just a regular bar. We're going to rebuild that in kind. Yeah, that's correct. That's correct right there. Aside from that, I as Mr. Berry was building this thing, became apparent that the plumbing lines were clogged, and he went in and started demolishing the courtyard to get at the plumbing lines to plug them. And as you can see from the photos that the staff took, one thing did lead to another, evidently. So that's really it. Nothing of historic value was uncovered during destruction. And it's, even though, and I don't really know about rebuilding that wall. That wasn't, that was sort of a surprise to me, I must say. So that's really it, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Crouch.
Yeah, you're welcome.
We will now have public comment, if any. Do we have any public comment, Ms. Parrish?
What's my mute button? We do not have any.
I didn't think so. I didn't figure so. We will now move to city staff comments and recommendations.
A quick staff observation. This submission is in reference to the conceptual design package for a courtyard renovation project, which was submitted for the June 9th BARL meeting. Staff withdrew the submission from the agenda as no demolition approval had been requested or granted. Some of the demolition work has been completed prior to the applicant's submission. And then staff comments. Number one, the railings, deck, stair, ramp, and other items proposed for demolition are not found to be significant, and this is a good opportunity for courtyard improvements. Number two, existing trees shall be protected during demolition and future construction. Number three, construction appears to be underway prior to approval. We're recommending final approval of demolition with staff comments.
Okay. Mr. Crouch, if you would like to respond in any way, you may. Please don't feel that it's necessary.
Well, just briefly, the trees are considered a great asset, and we certainly are going to protect them. I was a little disappointed to see that no tree protection had been installed, and I'm going to take care of that as soon as I get off this meeting.
And we appreciate that reassurance on your part. Let's see. All right, we'll now move to board discussion and a potential vote. What do my fellow board members have to say about this project presentation?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
James, permission to ask Tori a question, please.
Yes, of course.
What is the status of the permit on this project?
That's a great question. It's going to take me a minute to look for that.
And I'm in support of the final approval of demolition. I just was interested, is it following the normal?
Lori,
yes.
I believe that they have a stop work order on the work that was given after Lawrence took these photographs. But I can double check in Intergov if you'd like me to.
Sure, you're faster than me.
Thanks, Linda.
I'll take a peek while y'all are discussing.
That's very helpful. And I just want to add, I don't lay this at Mr. Crouch's feet at all. And so don't take it as a rebuke of you personally, but if you could communicate back to the folks working on this project that, you know, we don't demolish things before the fact and we don't build things before the fact. If there has in fact been a stop work order issued, I think they probably gotten that message, but to the extent that can be conveyed so that they familiarize themselves with that process, I think that would be helpful. I share Mr. Metter's conclusion and the recommendations of staff that this is fine. We have rules to follow for a reason. And again, that's not addressed to you, Mr. Crouch, personally. It is as to those directing this project.
Well, I'm with you.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion for final approval of demolition with staff comments.
Mr. Metters, your motion, as I hear it, is a motion for final approval of demolition with staff and board comments incorporated. Did I state your motion correctly?
Yes, sir.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second it.
That was
I'm
Mr.
sorry.
Fava. Yeah,
yes,
no, you're fine, Mr. Fava. I was just making sure.
Yes,
Having a motion and a second, I will proceed to call the roll. Mrs. Sobchuk, how do you vote on this motion?
Yay, in favor.
Mr. Metters.
Yay, in favor.
Mr. Fava.
yay in favor.
And myself, yay in favor. Correct me if I'm wrong. Lawrence, but Mr. White is not voting on this item, I believe, correct?
That is right.
All right.
Correct.
So the motion passes. We have final approval of demolition with staff and board comments. Mr. Crouch, thank you for appearing tonight.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'll see you in a couple of weeks for the real one.
Very good. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Mrs. Parrish, you ready to proceed to agenda item number 2?
I'm ready. That item is 145 Calhoun Street. Okay. This is the request for conceptual approval for renovation of restaurant space, including modifications to an existing steel trellis. I'm sorry. The building is not rated. It was constructed in 1955 and it sits in the old and historic district. Aerial here. This is the building that has Walgreens at Calhoun and King Street across from Marion Square. And then the actual project space that we're looking at is on the east end of that building. And this is the street view. The steel trellis that is noted in the request is what you're seeing right there. Another picture of that. And then we have some context photos from the streetscape. And looking west. And with that, we've got Mr. Hordorfer. Okay. I might pronounce that wrong, I apologize.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Mr. Hordorfer.
Yes.
Did I pronounce that correctly? I apologize if I did not.
That's well done. So thank you.
You have the floor.
Okay. As Tori mentioned, it's a very simple rooftop addition to an existing structure. You can probably go through these slides, the existing context. On these, you'll notice these first few slides, and in your presentation packet, there's a red outline of the proposed location of that steel framing up there, very simply to identify where it is in relation to the existing structure. Next slide. And the same thing in these aerial views, that red outline. And then also in looking at these, the steel structure is, the existing steel structure is the area we are proposing for the translucent plexiglass panels. Yep. Different angle from above. Next slide. And then the view from essentially the southeast of that outdoor terrace. Next slide. So here's the essentially upper floor plan. The area with the red dash is the area with the steel trellis. The red hatch is the area with the plexiglass or the solid polycarbonate panels that would be within the existing framing. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, that was the existing. This is the proposed, just showing the minor interior upfit that we are going to be doing to the building and the location of the steel beams. Next slide. Here's the streetscape elevations. Again, just calling out where the proposed steel framing will be. From the street, it's going to be really hard to make out, if at all, the polycarbonate panels that we're proposing to put on the existing steel framing. Next slide. A closer up view of the streetscape. You know, if approved, we would match identical to what is existing, the steel, the size of the steel, the color of the steel, the connections of the steel, and have it contiguous. You know, if you remember seeing on the existing aerial photographs, you know, that's a pretty exposed deck. It's exposed to the south and the west. You know, the previous tenant had rooftop umbrellas. I don't think that's that exciting to look at, and it's not as permanent or as potentially hazardous in a high wind event. So this is just something a little more stable to provide some protection from the elements, or some way to just break up the space on that rooftop. Next slide. And again, this is a view essentially from looking at it towards the east. So a building section existing and proposed close-up elevation. Next slide. And from the south, this is where you can see it from the parking lot, essentially from Burns Alley, with that kind of elevated on the left side. Next slide. And then here's just the detail of how that polycarbonate sheets would sit within the existing framing. So the W section that we are showing that are pointed downward is all existing as well. What we are showing is that polycarbonate sheet that would be pitched to a gutter system and then drained within the steel column at obviously intervals in order to just keep the water from not running out and all over the place. And I believe that's it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hortover. Any public comment on this, Ms. Parrish?
There's not.
We will then move to city staff comments and recommendations.
All righty. A couple of staff observations. Via conversation with the applicant, it is understood that the 5/8" thick thermoglass polycarbonate sheet depicted in the detail on page A400 will only apply to the existing trellis portions rather than the newly proposed trellis. Also, via conversation with the applicant, it is understood that the polycarbonate sheet will be specified as a translucent product rather than a clear product. The translucency will give it a milky appearance, but may mitigate concerns of the product yellowing as it ages. And then for our staff comments, number 1, it is understood that the beams, rafters, and louvers will be placed at a right angle from those at the existing trellis. While these are turned at a different angle, consider ways to further reflect the existing trellis, which utilizes double post and shorter spans. Number 2, trellis member sizes, colors, and finishes should match existing. Number 3, provide height dimensions on the follow-up submittal. Number 4, provide documentation on durability and effects of aging on proposed polycarbonate material. Number 5, indicate the location of the downspouts for the new aluminum gutters. Number 6, indicate color of proposed wood shims by preliminary review. And then our recommendation is a deferral for lack of information and clarity within the submission drawings, providing time for proper and clear documentation and labeling. And I would like to add that what I feel would happen in this case would be the applicant could come back and request preliminary and conceptual review in the next submission. But this recommendation is made simply for clarity with this drawing submission, if that makes sense.
It does, and I hear you loud and clear what you're saying. Very good. Would the applicant like to take the opportunity to respond?
Yes, please.
Sure.
Considering this is a conceptual submittal, I believe most of the comments would be answered in the follow-up submission for preliminary and final. We are just looking to see if the city would be in support of a rooftop addition to this existing trellis. Would obviously work with staff and detail out this for construction if it was in everybody's interest.
Okay, thank you very much. We will now move to any board discussion and a potential vote on this agenda item. What do my fellow board members have to say about agenda item number 2?
I'll jump in real quick. I think staff is on point here that the issue isn't really the concept of an addition to this trellis. It's rather just the clarity and specificity of this application. You know, this is something that comes up from time to time. The reason that the submittal requirements are as specific as they are is that we as a board have to understand precisely what we're granting conceptual approval for. And there's enough fogginess about this application that I think staff's recommendation is correct. And I think the addendum that Tori placed on that about coming back seeking preliminary is a good idea, so long as the application is clear and specific enough to warrant that at the time. But I agree with staff's comments and their recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. White. Other board members caring to comment on this agenda item?
Mr. Chairman, I agree with both staff and Jay.
Thank you, Mr. Metters. Further board comment?
This is Luda Sobchuk. I'm also concur agreement with staff and board members.
Thank you, Ms. Sobchuk. I believe that pretty much covers the boards. I don't have any comments at this particular time. That being said, unless there's further commentary, would any board member like to make a motion?
I'll introduce a motion for deferral in accordance with staff recommendation.
Mr. White, your motion, as I understand it, is a motion for deferral incorporating staff and board comments, including those made this evening. Is that a correct statement of your motion?
That's correct.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second, Mr. Chairman.
I will second that.
Okay.
Or Luda can second. Luda can.
Okay. Ms. Sobchuk gets it because Mr. Metters defers. So we have White's motion, Sobchuk's second. I will proceed to call the roll. Mr. Metters, how do you vote on this agenda item?
Yay in favor.
Mr. White?
Yay in favor.
Ms. Sobchuk?
Yay in favor.
And myself, yay in favor. So the item is deferred. Thank you to our presenter for this evening, and I feel assured that this will be addressed by staff in the manner that we have just discussed so as to expedite its re-review. Mrs. Parrish, what is agenda item number 3 this evening?
Item number 3 is not up for vote. It's for discussion only, but we're going to look at the proposed policy statement for solar collectors. What I thought I would do is we can show this on the screen, but I thought I might just kind of read it and pause in between some of the items and discuss it, or we can discuss it at the end. But the way our policy statements start, by motion of the Board of Architectural Review at such and such date, following guidelines were adopted concerning the solar panels or photovoltaic cells in the old and historic district, old city district, landmark corridor, there should be landmark overlay, and historic corridor. The Board of Architectural Review must consider the visual impact of all required components in relation to the historic, architectural, and aesthetic features of the building and the placement location. Therefore, the following guidelines for the installation of the solar panels should be followed. Sorry, catching a couple of things. All right.
Take your time.
Okay, the first section is sort of dividing properties up into a non-visibility and visual compatibility. What we have for non-visibility, solar collectors on historic buildings in the old and historic district, landmark overlay, or on buildings rated a category 1 or 2 on the architectural inventory should not be visible or should be only minimally visible if no alternative. And I want to say that the policy statement, if I did drop one in the Dropbox, that statement may have said something like landmark corridor and historic corridor. So what you see on the screen is the tweaked version. So old and historic district, landmark overlay, are Cat 1 or 2 buildings. Okay, and then visual compatibility. Solar collectors on historic buildings in the old city and historic corridor districts should be allowed some visibility while maintaining the historic character of the building. Solar collectors on new construction shall be less visually restrictive. Y'all want to take a pause to talk about any of that, or I can move on?
Mr. Chairman, I mean, either way you want to do it, but I had a comment on the non-visibility.
I think it would be very productive and an efficient use of our time if, just as Tori was suggesting, that as we go, if you have commentary, I would like to take it then. So James, if you want to speak to it, and again, I would suggest going forward, we make notes as we go, since this is a working document in the first cut. So with that, Mr. Metters.
Thank you. On the non-visibility, it has been confusing for me in the past when we talk about something not being visible, and then we go on to say, or minimally visible. wondering if we can have it, not visible, period. And then minimally visible is another dot. And because people like Jay and me, we work very diligent to make things minimally visible sometimes when we're taking our photographs or we're taking certain angle shots. And I think it's either visible or it's not. And I think it would be interesting to me if we could take the minimally visible out of it so we could have clarity.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Metters. Others on this? Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, do you think there should be any phrasing there about, case by case basis,
I do.
or that kind of thing?
I do.
You like that phrase, like a case by case basis?
Well, and I think I'm of a line with Mr. Metters thinking about this agenda item, and my personal opinion about how it should apply would be that the case by case clause would be attached specifically to the minimally visible if no alternative. I think we should have a clear policy preference to say that they should not be visible, full stop, unless there is no alternative, and if so, on a case by case basis. Is that kind of in line with what you were suggesting, James?
Yes, sir. Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because this applies to the most highly valued portions of the district or individual buildings. Buildings don't end up on the landmark overlay, for example, without some particular reason. So this makes sense. Just so long as the language pushes people to make it as to make it non-visible, if at all possible.
One of the things that I have not done as much research here, but in Florida, there was a blanketed state regulation that required, you could not interfere, and I don't know how that works with historic districts yet, but you could not interfere with the placement of solar panels as long, they had to be allowed to be placed within 90 degrees of due south. So I think that's one of the things that I'm fearful of. And that's one of the things we're trying to get ahead of, is some of that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that one of the numbered points below sort of gets at that. It might be the first one.
And again, I don't think we need to go into executive session on this at all. I'm just taking this as a general point of information. Is anyone, Tori or anyone with staff tonight, aware of any pending city ordinance or any other legislation, any other binding legislation regarding solar panels that would either impact this policy statement or that may be on the horizon?
I don't know of any, and I didn't even think to ask if there are any recusals. Is that something we need to consider for this call?
Not that I'm aware of, but I will poll the board. Does any board member need to recuse because of involvement with the issue of solar panels or a project pending that may be affected by solar panels?
No, I don't.
No.
Seeing none, I think we're good. And Tori, what I'm saying, please don't take my comment as a criticism in any way. I applaud you for being ahead of this issue. I just, well, without making a whole lot of other comment, I think you're probably way ahead on this issue. So to the extent we adopt the policy on it, I think that's great.
Okay.
I'm glad to know that the state of Florida has already reconciled or has some way of dealing with this. And I'm glad we're going to have a policy statement on it. But I mainly wanted to make sure that we were not dealing with an issue that had become imminent. So thank you.
So,
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I don't think this matters at all, but just we did a substantial solar installation downtown on Concord Street, and it's in the past, it's done, and it was actually approved at the staff level.
Okay.
But I just want to get that out there. And the second
I approve it.
Yeah, okay. The second is the Board of Architecture review. The second paragraph, maybe, and I don't. And please weigh in on this also, because this is your field. But at the end of it, I felt like it was lacking something like, and the impact on adjacent structures. And that may or may not be relevant, but I don't feel like it mentions adjacent structures, and maybe it doesn't need to, but just bringing that up as a comment.
Okay.
Yeah. That's something definitely to, you know, we pulled some documents from, you know, the NPS has a solar collector informational guide. But that's something I'm going to look into. And
this is also covered farther down, Tori, but I'll speak to it here because I think it's important to consider in the broader context is, and my architect friends can strongly rebuke me if they disagree with me on here, but I have some notion that, as we all know, solar panels have a fixed lifespan. They are a technology that is evolving in some way without giving license to them becoming unattractive. I personally do view them as a temporary or transient attachment to these structures, either because they're going to be replaced by new technology or they're going to wear out. They're a fixture, but not a permanent one. But I'd just make that comment generally without a need for additional language. Conceptually, I'd be glad to hear anything that my design experts have to say about that.
Well, it's a technological fixture, you know, and it's, yeah, you're right. Like any other element of technology, whether it's a rooftop HVAC unit or the weatherhead that brings power into your house or whatever, there may be very well a lifespan to it.
That's right. And without drawing a straight line analogy, I don't think that there's not a tremendous amount of preference for us preserving air conditioner window units, even though one could say that they are of a time and place, right?
That's right. There's nothing like that. That does exist in preservation circles, the preservation of building technologies like radiators and such, but that doesn't really exist here in Charleston.
Right.
Good point.
Well, I think going back to that non-visibility statement, I mean, I think the tweak might be the sentence as it reads, on buildings rated a category 1 or 2 on the architectural inventory should not be visible, period. If no alternative exists, a minimally visible location may be considered on a case-by-case basis or something like that.
Yes, wording very close to that.
Okay.
A couple of grammatical tweaks I think would be just fine.
Okay. Okay. All right. And then the visual compatibility category reads, solar collectors on historic buildings in the old city and historic quarter district should be allowed some flexibility while maintaining the historic character of the building. Solar collectors on new constructions shall be less visually restrictive. Do you have any thoughts on that one?
Do we have a third bullet point that specifically addresses new construction? Excuse me, or should this really just be about solar collectors on existing structures? I mean, I feel like that's really the intent of this document, is to address it when it comes to existing structures. You know, if a new applicant comes in for, well, a new building comes in and they intend solar collection in some way, that can just be reviewed as part of the whole. But I that's the only sentence in that bullet point that I, that ever stood out to me. I made a note about it, but I made a note about it on the old draft, not the new one.
Sorry about that. That statement didn't change much. Okay, that's a good point. And I'll say that, we've floated this out there to BAR Small and HCF and PSC. And so we're kind of gathering feedback and we'll compile it all. So this is not our only chance to get this right.
Tori, on this paragraph, kind of what Jay was saying, I don't have any specific language for tonight as we're just kind of working through this and banging it around. But kind of what Jay's saying in the 3 categories, we of course have category 1 and 2. We understand why we have that and why it should not be visible, or if it must be allowed, that it's minimal and on a case-by-case basis. I'm thinking that maybe there's a second one that takes historic buildings generally and says that that any solar panels or solar collection device should be deferential to the historic architecture, words to that effect, and compatible.
Yeah.
And that maybe there's a third category, as Jay is suggesting, that reflecting building being of its time, solar collectors on new construction shall of course be less visually restrictive given our times and trends in building and technology. Just to, that's, I don't have any more specific language. It's just maybe thinking of breaking it into 3 tiers instead of 2.
Okay.
Yeah, compatibility is the watchword here. We use that language over and over and over and over, and nobody seemed to have found fault with it. I think as long as you put everything in terms of compatibility,
okay,
then you're staying very close to the accepted language of preservation practice.
Okay. All right, so we would have non-visibility, visual compatibility, which we're gonna reference compatible. And then their third statement might be about new construction specifically. Okay.
And I think that that's not a bright line rule, but certainly to an applicant, you're making it much more clear which tiers, buckets you're going to end up in.
And Mr. Chairman.
Unless, what if you have new construction? No, well, no, because you're right, because they're all specific. Yep. Sorry, I didn't say anything.
So, Mr. Chairman, it's also takes me back to you got a new construction going up next to Category 1 building. So also in all situations, thinking about the impact on the adjacent structures.
Adjacent structure to the adjacent structure extension potentially, and again, this is not specific verbiage, but teasing out the notion of a neighborhood, streetscape, etc. Right?
Yes, sir.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Is there something in the ordinance that says something close to what James is referring to about like 50 feet or something from a Category 1 or 2 structure? This came up with when they were working next to the trolley barn. And I think there's something that, maybe that's height, I don't know, but I thought there was something in the ordinance that specifically referred to proximity to Category 1 and 2 buildings.
It is height. You can't, without specific board permission, you can't exceed the height of a Category 1 or 2 building if your proposed structure is within 50 feet of that. But the ordinance also has language that's broadly interpreted to say that additions or alterations within the purview of the BAR are considered not only on the basis of how they impact the structure in question, but the adjacent structures and the district as a whole. So I think that is already that's sort of an umbrella that all of this falls under. These policy statements are very specific direction. They're guidance to applicants and guidance to the board, but they're not ordinance in and of themselves. But that language about how it affects the neighbors is in the ordinance.
Yeah.
Thank you for pointing that out, Mr. White.
All right, I'll start going down numerically now, if you're ready.
Sure.
Number 1, collectors should be located on rear slopes behind architectural features or parapets or other locations not highly visible when applicable. I bet that when applicable is going to show, it's going to be concerning.
Well, I think if somebody's going to do solar collection, they have to orient it according to the sun angles. And, we can't necessarily suggest that if it's not on a rear slope, it's going to be harder to approve. I mean, really, if it's on a primary slope of roof yet not visible from the public right of way or minimally visible, then that's fine. I think we probably, in anticipation of possible other scenarios, I think we just probably ought to let people orient it as they will, and then we just judge the visibility and the impact of that on the historic district.
Well, then in that case, we would leave when applicable, it sounds like.
I think you'd probably actually just strike that whole thing, because the other thing you can't do is hide the stuff behind screening or parapets, because if if you put the panels in shadow, they don't do their job.
Right.
And Tori, this is not necessarily germane to the language of this policy statement itself, but something I'd be interested in seeing or knowing is having an engineer or an expert on these panels opine that if they were widely installed within our footprint, or we began to see a proliferation of them in our footprint, what elevations or portions of a roof they're most likely to appear on. It sounds like from your experience in Florida, they're going to be on the southern 90 degrees of the building, which makes perfect sense because of full daylight exposure. But it might be necessary, it might be useful and or necessary to have an expert tell us if you see these cropping up, this is probably where you're going to see them on any given building.
Okay, absolutely.
Yeah. They're going to show up on the same sides of the street as we have our piazzas,
right?
For the same reason.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting because a piazza roof tends to be flatter, low sloping,
relatively low,
maybe less visible.
Yep. Yeah, and this has been batted around for a long time, actually, within the profession. Is that like why don't people put PV on the roofs of their piazzas? Mm-hmm. They're oriented the correct. Now, sometimes they're not at the right pitch. That's the problem. Yeah. Sometimes the pitch of a piazza roof is not steep enough.
True.
But then it comes down to a matter of visibility.
Right. Well, I guess the good news is we have very few hip roofs. Most are gables, and I mean, when we're talking about residential, we're not going to have it on the front face. Okay. I'll jump to number 2. The structural capacity of any roof structure proposed to accommodate collectors shall be confirmed by an engineer.
I don't have any issue with that. Is there,
yeah,
okay.
Is there any question about purview on that? I guess legal will eventually look at this.
Yeah, I'll ask. I'll find out.
But I think in principle that sounds fine.
Okay. Number 3, installation should not penetrate historic roofing materials, should be more restrictive on turned metal roofs and prohibited on slate roofs.
I agree with the prohibition against putting them on slate roofs. But for turned metal or any other sort of roofing, you know, it's going to be tough because this sort of system, it's going to have to meet certain code criteria, and it can't just sit up there.
No.
And there are some systems that attempt to clamp onto the standing seam, but there's clamping onto the standing seam of a modern metal roof. I think if we allow this, there's going to be plenty of applications where they're going to have to attach this through the historic roofing. And I'm not sure we really, if we want to promote in any fashion that people put PV on the roofs of their houses,
right. Well,
we may just have to accept the reality of them attaching through the roof into the structure of the roof.
Right, and it's not really our purview, but penetrating a turned metal roof, it creates its own set of problems, as Mr. White and Mr. Metters well know.
So, Mr. Chairman,
yes, sir.
The installation we did at Concord Street and the many other installations we've done, we're using the device that does not penetrate the roof, but it's also on new metal roofs. And so, I mean, but I think that this goes back to number 2. Because the applicant's going to be talking to their engineer about what they need to do in order to make sure that it's in compliance with the code for installation. So I think 3's good. If your turned metal roof's in good shape, it's easy to install these on standing seams. But I also think that whole process gets confirmed by the engineer.
That's number 2.
Yeah. And you know, we've had. I think Linda, you had an experience where you had something that was looking at solar clips or clamps, right? She may have stepped away. Okay.
No, I'm here. Sorry. Yes, and without the section, it looked like it was penetrating the roof until Lawrence and I looked at that, and it was a clamp system. So. But just the detail wasn't very well done. So, but absolutely.
You know, one of the statements that our BARS deals with a lot are these, and it may be usually it's in reference to a piazza enclosure or changes, that whatever we do, it can be removed and it's as if it was never there. And so I'm thinking about that in reference to this turn metal roofing.
Perhaps reversible, making it completely reversible.
Yeah. Maybe we throw in some of that language, like reversible, or maybe
that would be hard. That would be hard to accomplish from a technical point of view. And the other thing to keep in mind, and it's beyond the scope of this conversation a little bit, but every single turn metal roof in downtown Charleston is doomed. They're aging out and they can't be replaced in kind because the material is no longer manufactured. So I don't know how hard we want to go against this, but I think the key here is that you don't want somebody trying to attach this through a slate roof. That would be disastrous.
Certainly agree on that, and maybe bounce around what to do about turn metal.
You know, though, I'm so sorry. I was going to say they could attach it to synthetic slate. Just joking.
Oh, you will.
Okay. Number 4, significant character defining features shall not be removed or damaged, but follow the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation to protect historic integrity. So, you know, this is kind of covered in the next number 5. It's like, you know, dormers and valleys and any sort of interesting roof stuff is what that's referring to.
I agree with that. I agree I agree wholly with items 4 through 7.
Okay, then I'm going to
I do also.
Okay.
And I was just going to say 4 through 5 with me.
Okay. Do I need to read that out loud for posterity's sake, or you want me to jump?
I think that's fine unless somebody objects. We at least got through 4 and 5.
Number 6, the system should be low profile or no more than 8 inches off the surface. It should be at a pitch consistent with the existing roof while not obscuring the ridge or eave. Basically, the system has to be parallel to the roof slope.
And I
have a question about that. Depending upon, and maybe James can speak to it. I haven't used one recently, but isn't the slope critical to the collection as well? And not that I don't disagree with it, but if it has to be at a certain angle and it's different from the root slope, does that mean it wouldn't be allowed?
That's right, Eddie. That's a great point, because we just, in saying this, we just nixed any flat roof opportunities where you could have a sloped panel behind a parapet. So I think that needs to be tweaked to do something for that condition.
Yeah, that's a good point, because if somebody wants to put it on a piazza roof that's, you know, 2 and 12, and if they put the panels at 4 and 12, yet you still can't see it from the street, who cares?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, I'm making a note. All right, number 7, the color of conduit and all attachment mechanisms shall be painted to be compatible to the roof or the siding, etc.
Yeah, I think that one's a non-issue.
Number 8, retrofitting measures should be limited to those that achieve reasonable energy savings at reasonable cost with the least impact on the historic fabric and character of the building. That's going to be kind of hard, I think, to, I mean, it's a good guideline, but I think it's kind of hard to implement.
Yeah. It's the first time ever that the BAR has ever uttered the phrase reasonable cost.
Right. Well, and
I think it's unenforceable.
That may not be an issue of our purview. The reasonable energy savings is a part of our purview. I don't know if that counts, run it past legal. We could certainly agree that if you need a standalone number 8, you could say, this is a general truism, there should be the least impact on the historic fabric and character of the building. But that's
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I think that makes the most sense. Okay. And number 9, solar collector system shall be installed in a manner that is reversible. Oh my gosh, here it is. That is reversible and with consideration for the continuing advancement of technologies.
That was the one I was alluding to when I said that it's a transient or non-permanent technology.
Yes, you did.
You know, it kind of speaks to it.
I think you change shall to should, and you're good to go.
All right.
And I wanted to just run back to 7 real quick.
Sure.
I you know, if I were putting all of our conduit in the projects that we've done is is non-painted. So I mean, it's been stainless steel or copper. It's, you know, so there's no maintenance to it. And it is compatible with what's around it, but I don't want to, I would hope to not have to paint something.
Yeah.
And this says shall be painted.
It shouldn't be so specific about being painted, but it should, maybe it's shall match or shall be painted to match.
Yeah.
Or finish is compatible.
Okay, that's good.
Finish
That's
is
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just finish the surface.
Good point. Okay. And then the last statement, the Board of Architectural Review resolves closely to review applications for solar panels and will consider these applications on a case-by-case basis. I hope we don't see many, but we need to be prepared.
And procedurally, I think that's fine as differential from the aesthetics of a case-by-case basis. Well, Tori, this was, I appreciate you going through this exercise and being so forward-thinking.
Well, I have to say it was mostly Kim from our team, so she's been working on this for a while.
We'll pass on the compliments to her. I think this was a worthwhile exercise. It's nice to be ahead of something.
Yes, it is.
Thanks, everybody.
We'll compile all these. That's all that we have for today.
Anything else for the good of the order this evening before we close? Thank you all for your service, staff. Thanks for your hard work. We'll see you soon.
Thank you
all.
Have a good
evening.
Everybody.
You have a good night.
Thanks, guys. Yeah.